Welcome to the Numerical Tarot, a new tarot paradigm, an alternative to tradition, an axial system of archetypal crystallography, a trans-culturally anthropomorphized life-biased binary influence calculator, a wisdom system and archetype enhancer with harmony of interpretation throughout. The content of all the videos in this series are excerpts, edits and brief summaries from the eBooks All Things Are Numbers and All Things Are Patterns, links below. For a more complete explanation of each idea, additional reading might be helpful. Hopefully the basic ideas come across enough to pique your interest in trying this alternative approach to tarot. In the tarot journey that follows, I decided to search for something that seemed really simple, something isomorphic to nature and organically ergonomic. In my search for a better design, I managed to craft a hypothetical model of universal cosmic consciousness that is not only organically ergonomic, but also very simple in design. Economy of design is important, it's the way nature works. Thus, this study of tarot existence and consciousness offers a model of wisdom that is simple in design. So simple, in fact, that it can be diagrammed with only 4 circles and a point. That's it. That's all there is to my model of existence, upon which I base every conclusion about tarot, life, the universe and consciousness. That's right. Every conclusion I draw about the nature of existence and how it all relates to tarot can be traced back to one of those 4 circles or that point. That's it. Sound simple enough? What follows in this study is an entire wisdom system, and several tarot decks, based solely upon those 4 circles and point. If you are interested in an alternative approach to tarot that is really, really simple, then stay tuned. Back in grade school science class, a standard exercise for beginning scientists was to observe a candle flame and write down as many things as possible about that simple flame: shape, color, behavior, heat, light, etc. It was just a simple flame, but usually the observant scientists of the class would find many things to write down. The wisdom system being presented everywhere in this study evolves from 4 circles and a point, which are meant to represent, in our 3-dimensional world, 4 concentric spheres in a center. That's all. Very simple. But, like that simple candle flame, there are lots and lots of things to observe about those 4 nested spheres and center. Lots. All of the other models being offered everywhere in this study are an attempt to observe, like that candle flame, the many ways in which these simple parameters of existence can be seen, and, eventually, to observe how they influence life. The form of tarot that results from these observations is thus universally inspired by archetypally primordial patterns that are the same for every culture the world has ever known or ever will know. 4 circles and a point are very simple. But providing evidence or proof that such a model can describe all of existence, or that it should even exist itself by natural means, is not always that simple. I could provide an elaborate proof or explanation for the origins of such a simple idea, and I have, in the eBooks mentioned at the beginning of this video. But for those who don't require elaborate explanations in order to accept a simple idea, we will begin this study of existence with a much easier method that anyone can use to create this same theoretical model, using just 2 simple, seemingly obvious concepts of common sense thinking. With only 2 steps in mind, this study of tarot and existence asks us to consider the following. 1. Things exist. Or they don't. Existence versus nothing. There are actually 3 parts to that equation: existence, nothing, and versus. The versus part represents the presence of a line of demarcation between existence and nothing. We could draw that line on paper as a diagram, with all the visual and personal bias that goes with it. But the interesting part of all this is how we don't need to. Ultimately, it's just a concept that is there, invented and owned by no one, with no cultural, religious or personal bias. Just abstract ideas infinitely drawn nowhere. Very archetypal. Existence displaces, pushes aside, or produces a swirling spacetime vortex within the infinite continuum of nothingness around us, to create a reference frame or bubble of existence. Outside the reference frame is nothing. Inside the reference frame is something. Again, we don't need to diagram these ideas, but, just for fun, here's a diagram. Which is of course a linear, 2-dimensional representation of an idea that is to be imagined 3-dimensionally. Something displaces nothing. That seems simple enough. But where does it lead? Here is the second of our 2 simple, seemingly obvious concepts. 2. Everything that exists has an inside and an outside. Within the area of existence, there is a manifest entity with its own line of demarcation between its insides and outsides. Here is another diagram. That's it. Two simple ideas. Something displaces nothing. Everything has an inside and outside. Pretty simple. Together, these two simple ideas create the fundamental parameters of our simple model of existence. Nothing. And something. Insides. And outsides. Very simple. Very archetypal. From these two simple concepts, a model of existence is conceived. And from the parameters of this very simple and very archetypal model, important lines of demarcation are realized. For example, between nothing and something, there is a line of demarcation. Also, between insides and outsides, there is a line of demarcation. Between the left and the right of center, there is also a line of demarcation, or axis of symmetry. Let's examine these lines of demarcation further. The axis. Every manifest entity has some kind of discernible presence, that's what makes them manifest. That presence exists around a central point of confluence that resides inside the discernible presence. The surface. The discernible presence defines the mass of the manifest entity. The point where the insides and outsides of the mass meet is a line of demarcation. The surface of the thing, whatever the thing might be, and however indistinct that surface might be. There will always be some point at which we are no longer inside, but are outside. The reference frame. Existence continues on, outside the mass and surface to the extent of the reference frame. The sphere of influence of any mass tapers off, like heat radiating, or atmosphere dissipating, or gravity diminishing, or sound fading. The point at which it becomes unmeasurable, are no longer manifest, we again cross a line of demarcation between something and nothing. If we add a line of demarcation to this diagram, to indicate the axis, middle, or center, lo and behold, 4 circles and point magically appear. When these various lines of demarcation, and the stuff they demarcate, are labeled with numbers, a number line of 9 stages magically appears. Every idea I put forth about the nature of existence and tarot symbols and icons is derived from these lines of demarcation and the stuff they demarcate. That's it. Pretty gosh darn simple, I'd say. It only took 2 simple obvious common sense concepts to create a theoretical model of existence. For those of us who are manifest entities displacing the continuum of nothingness that surrounds us, and I think we all are, it is possible that these 2 simple concepts, working together, might be influencing us. What if they are? From the point of view of a tarot deck, it might explain the why of a few things. For example, consider the possibility that maybe we connect through the Empress, 3, to the theoretical skin of this model's surface to conjure up ideas like sensitivity and the touching of surfaces. Maybe we connect, through Temperance, 5, to the infinite in between nature of the center to conjure up ideas like reciprocity, alternation and temperance between sides. Maybe we connect, through the Hermit, 9, to the all-encompassing reaches of this model's reference frame to conjure up ideas like totality and vast amounts of knowledge about the universe that lies just beyond our reference frame or sphere of influence. Maybe we connect, through the Emperor, 4, to the mass or guts of this model to conjure up ideas like substance, integrity and the power of a coagulated mass existing in space. I define an archetype as a primordial pattern that is timeless and transcendental in form, or formlessness, and from which all symbols and icons are derived, either consciously or unconsciously. For example, most people agree that the magician and the hermit are both icons of intellect. The magician is young and clever. The hermit is old and wise. To me, a simple pattern of 4 circles in a point explains why they are so similar. They share the same sphere of influence. We can illustrate clever and wise 1,000 different ways, using the icons of 1,000 different cultures. People do. But why do we? Why are the iconic personifications we use archetypal? I believe that it is not just because they appear again and again across cultures. That's like looking at a symptom and not the cause. I think it's because they express fundamental, primordial patterns of nature that define our very existence. The ones that do this the best, in the purest form, are the ones that get repeated most often and are most easily recognized across cultures and ages of time. In the early days of tarot, the sequence of the major icons changed several times between various card makers. Sometimes the Papess was the 4th card, next to the Pope. Sometimes the virtues traded places with other cards. With these kinds of fluctuations in mind, we could theorize that, regardless of what story someone might have set out to tell with these images, the two most popular sequences that have come down to us today represent a kind of settling of consciousness into the expression of a universal, archetypal pattern. What is that pattern? I believe it is the one outlined here. And just how close do the two most popular sequences of tarot come in illustrating that pattern? I believe they come very close indeed. The numerical tarot approach to tarot believes that an in-depth look at primordial patterns of nature can help explain the essence of all archetypal personifications, both the pure and less pure. People prefer to study the thousand faces of an archetype instead of the abstract patterns at the root of that archetype, because most cultures promote the idea of more being better. In a world where more is better, collecting becomes an addiction to many. In a world where collecting has great value, quantity of knowledge becomes more important than quality of knowledge. I would concede, however, that learning tarot the cross-cultural anthropological way is very educational. It expands your horizons. You learn a lot about the differences and similarities between cultures throughout history. And if pursued with vigor and an ironclad memory, an encyclopedic mind could result. Amassing a great wealth of knowledge about the icons, symbols, and mythologies of a multitude of cultures is impressive. But I believe that when it comes to tarot, too many people value quantitative knowledge over that of qualitative wisdom, and as a result do not offer much clarity of vision with their cross-cultural approach. In contrast to this, the numerical tarot goes in a completely opposite direction. The numerical tarot is a system of logical analysis that is built upon an armature of ideas that attempt to be as transcultural as possible. What is the difference? To me, cross-cultural means an amalgam of anthropological ideas from a multitude of minds, each with its own personal or cultural bias. While transcultural means distillation of ideas to an essence that is so abstract in form that it cannot be attributed to any one single mind, or cultural source, but at the same time, can be seen as the essence beneath them all. The approach taken by the numerical tarot attempts to be transcultural. In this way, it is reductionist. By that I mean that instead of compounding to complexity, it attempts to distill or reduce to simplicity. In the diagram shown, we expand our two steps of creation, and the fundamental parameters of existence that result from those two steps, to compare those fundamental parameters of existence to the fundamental parameters of existence that define a planet in space. A planetary analogy is simple and obvious. For those familiar with traditional icons, the significant stages of a planetary model can easily be used to describe archetypal influences from what is inarguably a primordial pattern, to be sure. For those who believe, as I do, that the icons of tarot are derived from archetypes, and that archetypes are derived from the transcendental influence of primordial patterns, then a planetary allegory might be a good pattern to learn about. We have already described how a few traditional icons of tarot might be seen as expressing these fundamental parameters of existence, but when compared to the parts of a planetary model, things become a bit more obvious. Let's reiterate by looking at the Empress. Known for sensitivity, the Empress carries the number 3, which associates her with the surface or theoretical skin of the planetary model. The surface of things is where they touch, making sensitivity an important concept for a 3. Remember the Emperor, known for integrity, power, and influence. He carries the number 4, which associates him with the mass or guts of the planetary model. The Lovers, known for marriage, hold the number 6, also associated with the mass of the model, where coagulating lines of force converge, mix and blend together. Temperance carries the number 14, which when theosophically reduced becomes a 5. Temperance tosses liquid from one goblet to the other, to symbolize the alternation that takes place at an infinite middle that cannot belong to any one side, but must exist between, alternating its influence back and forth. Temperance has 2 wings, left and right, 2 cups, one emptying and one filling, 2 feet, one in water and one on land, all saying the same thing. This is the midpoint of the number line where opposites butt together symmetrically like wings, or exchange sides and flow back and forth like water between cups, or remain segregated like water, symbol of the unconscious or subconscious, and land, symbol of the conscious. The midpoint of the number line is the ultimate in-between, between any of these two pairs. Thus its nature is that of alternation, back and forthing. In the temperance example, ultimate in-betweenness is the conceptual, principal, primordial pattern, infinitely drawn nowhere. Alternation is the archetypal influence, observed and acknowledged by human. The icon called temperance is the symbolic, anthropomorphized representation or personification of the archetypal influence, of the conceptual pattern, of in-betweenness, or middle, or center, or axis. Iconic representations of archetypal influences are not archetypal because of repetition within or across cultures. They are archetypal because they are the embodiment of universal, transcendental primordial patterns that do not belong to any one culture, but can be found everywhere in the universe. People talk of a collective unconscious as the source of archetypes. I propose universal, transcendental patterns as a source of archetypes. A collective unconscious collects evidence from humanity. Universal transcendental patterns exist with or without humanity. Thus, I prefer to use a phrase like universal consciousness to describe this source. This is how the numerical tarot asks you to look deeper. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope the basic concepts came across. You might have been confused by my card images and how some of them coincided with tradition while others that followed looked completely different. That's because I make some radical changes to the images of tradition. I decided to include those new images anyway, just to keep things interesting. You will have to keep watching to see how this new paradigm justifies such radical changes.